my life turned upside down in a span of just a few years. So I lived with my mom in that house. The lack of running water was the least of my problems. It was a really difficult childhood, abusive home. I didn't have any freedom. I couldn't go out with my friends. All I had to do was study and clean, and that was my entire growing up. And one day I just showed up at home and I'm like, I'm leaving. My perspective completely opened up. Like, I realized that the world is a huge, infinite place full of infinite possibilities. It felt like there were no limits. Absence of results, absence of excellence is not failure. You just haven't mastered it yet. Failure is only when you decide to give up and say, well, this was a failure, I'm gonna move on. You don't have any chance to succeed anymore because you stopped trying. If you avoid doing what's hard and challenging, then you're not going to grow.
Anita, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters podcast. When we were preparing for this conversation, you told me about your story of growing up in Croatia post-war. And so for the benefit of our listeners who may not know the history of the region and the history of what was the former Yugoslavian Republic, could you give us a little bit of that? And what was life like for you growing up in Croatia?
Hi, Sanjay. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. So I grew up in Croatia, which was right after the breakup of Yugoslavia, which was a socialist state. I was born in 1988, and the war broke out in 1990.
Right.
By the end of that's when the conflicts. It was obvious that the war was going to start. In 1991, it was officially. It officially started, and it lasted for 4 years. So I was a kid back then, and I didn't really understand what was going on. I remember experiencing some fear, watching the news, seeing everybody around me panicking. My dad wasn't around because he was in the army during that time, so he was always on some missions. So it's difficult to talk about it because if I compare my experience to someone who hasn't been through war, then yeah, I've got maybe some stories to tell and they might empathize with me. But compared to everybody else, there isn't, there is, I mean, everybody else in Croatia, right? There's nothing to tell because my experience hasn't been I haven't lost anyone. My house isn't like my house didn't burn down or anything like that. I wasn't a refugee or anything like that. So w- I don't feel like I have the right to talk about that. You know what I mean? Like, because there's nothing really extraordinary to share. The trauma that I experienced is just part of the collective social trauma that
Mhm.
y- you couldn't be completely um, untouched by that. Whoever lived in Croatia during that time experienced some form of fear and trauma so my experience has basically been like that. Just being in that context had a huge impact on me and my family growing up. Um, and I think it's just yeah, it's part of my life narrative.
I
It's
suppose
always
when
going
you
to
when
be a
you're
part.
growing up in this sort of situation, you don't know any different because, as you say, you were quite young, right? You were what, 2 years old
Yeah,
when the war kicked off, and so you know no different, and so therefore it's kind
yeah.
of part of your normal life almost.
Yeah, yeah. But when a nation goes through something like that, it forms it kind of strengthens the national identity and pride, and that certainly had an impact on me. I grew up in this atmosphere of we, the Croats, we are the proud nation who suffered a lot. We were the victims. The international community recognized us as the victims and also winners because we won the war, we gained our independence, and all of that. So that's like a really romantic story. Now, of course, in history books, as you go through school, you don't learn about the darker, side of all of that because, there are no winners in any war, and
Mm.
atrocities have been committed on both sides and all of that. And so when you learn about those things, it kind of it makes you re-examine that entire narrative, that has been constructed around it. And I guess that kind of history does get ingrained in your personal identity of, you
Hmm.
know, feeling like the underdog, feeling like the victim of a bigger oppressor, and then coming out of it victorious. That's that kind of hero's journey
Yeah.
also became, it didn't I wouldn't say define me completely, but it definitely did play a role in my personal identity, right? I did identify, I think we all did, all of us kids who grew up in that during those times, but we do have that part of the national narrative of the victim who emerged victorious.
Hmm.
We have that ingrained in us, I think. Um, for better or for worse, because it is a story of heroism, of succeeding against the odds, but it's also a story of being oppressed and victimized. And, it's not, in that sense, it's not an entirely empowering story. Yeah.
Mm.
Um,
I
yeah.
think your
But
story, based on what you've said though, to me previously, you grew up in poverty, right? And there was difficult moments, and yet you have transformed that, and you had opportunity coming your way. So let's talk a little bit about that. What was life like growing up, where you had to go, you had no running water, for example, and you had all of those things to think about, things
yeah,
we take
I
for
just
granted, now.
Yeah, I just realized something as I was saying this, as you were asking this question, that some stories only make sense when you compare them to other people's stories, because
Yes.
everything that I said so far in our conversation isn't a very interesting thing here where I live in Croatia, right? Because everybody has kind of been through that. Even if you haven't lost anyone, you still experienced all that I just said. And so I didn't even think that was a story until I started talking to you.
Right.
It just wasn't a story material. It's like describing clouds in the sky, like whatever, they're there. Everybody
Yeah.
can see them, right? So this is what it felt like for me. And this story only makes sense when you tell it to someone who hasn't been through that experience, and now there's something that they can maybe learn from you or whatever. But if it's a story that defined everybody collectively, then it's invisible to me how it actually defined me. You
Yes.
know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I just realized that. Um, yeah, growing up in a house without water. Well, that wasn't the reality for most people. So that is a story that is interesting even here because it had nothing to do with the war. It was just my circumstances growing up. I grew up with my mom and my stepdad and two younger brothers in a house that was in a very poor condition without running water. And that was the least of my problems because it was a really tough childhood. But today it does give me a little bit of a like, I don't know if pride is the right word, because there's nothing really to be proud of except the fact that I endured,
Yeah.
I lived there, and it sounds like I'm a strong woman because I needed to, take an axe to break the ice and then scoop the water out and heat it on the stove to be able to, wash my hair or do the dishes or clean or wash anything really.
Mm.
So it does sound a little bit crazy that in Central Europe in the 21st century, somebody could be living in those conditions. So um, I guess I find it funny today when I look at that because it's just so ridiculous.
But I think you
Um,
you said, like, taking pride in that. Actually, you should be taking pride in that, because that's kind of part of what forged you, right? To be who you are and have that resilience and all of the other things that come with that sort of upbringing. Um, so I think, yeah, pride is the right word for it.
mm, but you know what happens? I've had running water for many years now, living in normal conditions. And the thing is, I mean, you forget. You would think that, okay, now that I finally have running water, I'm never gonna forget about how I used to, scoop the ice cold water out of the barrel. But you do forget. You get used to the new standard. And if I had to do that again, I might suffer a little bit less than you, but I would still suffer a lot. Like, why
Yeah.
do I have to do this, right? So I think that when you overcome a certain hardship, after a while, you just get used to the new level of comfort. And over time, people forget. I forget.
Mm.
And they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I'm not so sure about that, because that was ages ago. And okay, I know that I can do this. I know it's not that horrible. You can survive that. It's not the end of the world, but it's not like I'm not really sure that that's what made me a stronger person, a more
Mhm.
resilient person or whatever. It made me a bit less spoiled.
Right.
Like, yeah, maybe a bit more appreciative, more able to notice that it's a privilege to have running water, but only when I really think about it. But on a daily level, it's not that every time I open the faucet, I'm like, "Oh, thank God I don't have to take the"
Yeah.
it's just you get used to it, and so I think, um, the lessons that we learn from hardship do have a relatively short shelf life.
I think that's
They
true.
don't
As I shared with you, when we were preparing for this, I went to Everest Base Camp, and on during the trek, right, it was this December, it's cold, it's like between -18 and -25 at night, depending on which part of the trek you're on. And you get up in the morning and you want to wash your face or you want to brush your teeth, and the water is either freezing cold or it's actually frozen. And you have to kind of like get used to that. And we got to a point like day 10 or 11 of our trek, and we were coming back down. I went to one of the tea houses, and I got up in the morning to go and go to the bathroom and wash my face. And the tap was running next to the toilet. So I went to switch the tap off, thinking this is a waste of water. And I touched the tap and it was hot. The water was hot in the tap. And that's the first time we had hot water in a basin for like 10 days. And the feeling was just so overwhelming of something as simple as that, that we take for granted.
Mm,
And yet here it was, in the thing. So I agree. The feeling is short lived, right? The memory of
yeah.
that is short lived. But there is an element of resilience, I think, that comes from having gone through
Mm,
that as a child as you did, and to an extent, I went through a similar sort of thing as a child where, you know, bathrooms were cold, water was cold, we had no heating in the house, and those sorts of things. Not to the same extent as you did, where we had to go outside and get it, but there's those things that maybe they do hold you in good stead, maybe they don't, right? But
yeah.
it's part of our life experience.
Mm, and for sure, I remember, like, my, friends at school, the problems that they had and the problems that I had.
Mhm.
There was a really big difference, and the problems that they experienced, the typical problems of growing up, I also had them, but I didn't even perceive them because they were so tiny compared to my other issues.
Right,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I think that played a huge role back then,
Mhm.
um, in the way that I perceived my childhood or teenage years. I was definitely, I think I was a more grateful person. I was more, I would say, aware of all the privileges. It was a privilege to be able to complain about silly teenage things, right?
Yeah.
In my mind back then, yeah.
Yeah, understood. So as a teenager, you were awarded a scholarship to go to Costa Rica. So how did that
Yeah.
come about?
So, yeah, my life turned upside down in a span of just a few years. So I lived with my mom in that house, and it was the lack of running water was the least of my problems. It was a really difficult childhood, abusive childhood, abusive home. I didn't have any freedom. I couldn't go out with my friends. All I had to do was study and clean, and that was my entire growing up, and it was
Right.
horrible. And I was depressed. I was miserable, right? And I just wanted to leave that place and find a good home. And so I just talked to a psychologist, in my school. I told her what problem the problem that I have, and I asked her if she could help me find an alternative, family or home or whatever institution because I just couldn't bear it anymore. And she did. She reached out to social services and we kind of organized this on our own, like coordinated it with them. And one day I just showed up at home and I'm like, I'm leaving. And
Right.
I packed my bags and I left. I got my mom's permission, luckily, because I was underage, so that was still necessary. But um,
How
yeah,
how
and
old were
then
you at this time? What,
I
14,
was
15?
15.
15, right.
I was 15, I was in my first year of high school, and so I left home. I went to this institution, they're called the SOS, Children's Villages, and that was interestingly the first and the only year, as far as I know, that they accepted kids who didn't go to their preschool and elementary school program. They have these villages, they have these little homes, they're like houses, and they have these women who come there and they kind of act as surrogate mothers. I wasn't in that because I lived with my family, and so this was a community specifically for high school kids, and I was lucky enough that this was the only time, as far as I know, and the first time, and as far as I know, the only time that they accepted someone who didn't go through the entire program.
Right.
So it was me. Yeah, yeah. And so I was really lucky to get there. And suddenly I had my own room. I had my pocket money. I was able to do like try out different hobbies, which was never allowed to do before. I started playing the guitar. I jumped with a parachute. I went to a parachuting school. Um, I suddenly had normal childhood,
Mhm.
including running water and a hot shower and all of that. So it was that was a huge transformation for me. And then after 2 years of living there, I got a scholarship for Costa Rica because interestingly, it was a United World College, and there are, I think, almost 18 of them around the world. It's an institution that was started after World War II with the intention of creating a multicultural international environment, school environment from kids from all over the world. Um, and so this this was the first year that the school in Costa Rica, they just started, right? They just established the college in Costa Rica. I was a pioneer, and they offered one scholarship for one person from from the SOS institution in Croatia.
Right.
So it felt like again, I was really lucky because this was the first and the only time they did that.
Right.
And so I got the scholarship. And, so in a span of 2 or 3 years, my life just completely transformed from basically living like a Cinderella in a house with like no running water, where we had yeah, I was just doing house chores and studying, and that was all that I was doing.
Mhm.
Um, and being really, really miserable, right? To living in Costa Rica, in this exotic country with students from like more than 100 countries from all over the world, um, and getting this prestigious education, the IB program, which later on was my ticket to the US, where I studied at a college there, where I also got a scholarship. So it was just mind blowing to me that my life changed so much in such a short time span. It was dizzying, yeah, because from that level of despair that I felt living at home to this level of excitement, it was incredible that that
Yeah.
happened to me, and I just couldn't even believe my own luck.
Mm.
Yeah.
And of course, physical environment in Costa Rica, tropical country,
Mm,
considerably different to Central Europe, right? In terms of
yeah,
look and
exactly.
feel and everything.
I kept pinching myself the whole time because, like, one day I'm sitting outside and reading a book, and then suddenly there's a family of iguanas passing by.
Right.
They're like migrating through our college. I'm like, what the hell is happening? And
Yeah.
just like, I can't believe this is happening. And my friends back home couldn't believe some of the stories that I shared with them because
Mhm.
there are like so many exotic animals there. So there was like an encounter with a shark. Yeah, like crazy adventures that happened. Like, got carried away by a crocodile-infested river. Nothing happened, but just like weird, crazy, exotic stories that involve, people with weird names from all over the world and then exotic animals that they've only seen in documentaries. So yeah,
Mhm.
my life felt like a movie for
Yeah.
sure.
Wow. So that's a huge contrast, right, and a huge change. Um, so having done your studies in Costa Rica, having done your degree in back in the USA, what did you do next? What was the next step in your life?
Yeah, so I graduated from the US. I studied philosophy and psychology, and I felt really homesick. Uh, the US was a very different environment than Costa Rica. It was still a small college, so it was supposed to create be the same experience, like a small, intimate community of students who are all like liberal and open-minded, and it's a multicultural environment. And technically, that's what it was, but it didn't feel the same. It didn't feel as warm and friendly and intimate, and I just did not resonate with the values of the um, American society. Basically, I couldn't see myself building my life there.
Mhm.
It didn't feel safe. It didn't feel like, yeah, it just didn't feel like a place that I belonged to. And so I moved back home. I finished my master's degree here in psychology because I wanted to pursue that. For a while, I was completely lost because what I did not anticipate, I thought when I come back home, I'm finally gonna be, at peace. I'm gonna be happy. This is because I would come back home for holidays,
Mhm.
so um, I kept touch with my friends here and everything, and I thought that this is gonna be great. I'm finally gonna have like the life that I um, been dreaming about for the past 4 years. My friends have been telling me about their how much fun they're having, and I have been studying and just being very serious, and I didn't experience that wild, student life. So I was looking forward to that, and it just didn't happen. I was really confused because what happened is that I didn't belong at home anymore. I felt like I didn't belong there, and
Okay.
I didn't belong at home either because I changed too much,
Hmm.
and that was a really painful realization.
And did you
Um,
shed the, because you said about the collective kind of victim mindset versus the, you go David and Goliath, whatever the right kind of term is. Had you shed that and then you came back and you found that people around you hadn't shed that kind of mindset?
yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. I think what happened for me is that my perspective completely opened up. Like I realized that the world is a huge, infinite place full of infinite possibilities, and I became much more open-minded. I've met people of all races and colors and religions, and for me, it felt like there were no limits. And
Uh-huh.
when I came home, um, all I saw was limits, and it's yeah, I guess the mentality here is, there's a lot of learned helplessness
Uh-huh.
and a lot of bitterness about the political situation and the economic situation, and I came back with this, dreamy, visionary, excited, optimistic energy,
Uh-huh.
and, after experiencing the really, I would say, the best possible education, the highest level of education that you can imagine. I think this was really like when I look at the academic level of the college that I graduated from, it was the best in class, right?
Uh-huh.
I received really top-notch education. After experiencing that and coming back to the Croatian university, which still relies on heavily memorizing facts, a very old-fashioned approach to education. It was defeating. It was difficult for me to go back to this system after, having critical thinking classes, classes where I debate professors, and you have to read the materials in advance and come prepared and prepared to defend your argument. I come to a class where I just need to memorize a bunch of definitions, and it
Right.
felt really just like I wanted to wake everybody up. I wanted to like um show them how backwards this is. But of course, this is the system here. There's
Mm.
nothing that
Mm.
I, as an individual, can do. And so I had to adapt to that. But it was difficult. Yeah. And it was difficult to come back to that. It felt, in a lot of ways, it felt liberating, but in a lot of ways, to come back home, but in a lot of ways, it felt, I don't know, the just like a step back, I would say. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So that that's not something that you anticipate, because you think, now when the difficult chapter is over, now finally I'm going to be happy, I'm going to be free. And then what you encounter is that you're lost, right?
Yeah. And that's a
Yeah.
really good point you made there because we often, yeah, okay, that was quite a change, right? A contrast from going from Costa Rica, the USA, back to Croatia. You've had 4 or 5 years outside of the country, you've come back. So that's quite a big change. But actually, that thought about, well, things, when I, if this happens, then that will be better. Or if this happens, that will be better. And almost like going back with that mindset that now I've got all of this and it will be better, but actually it wasn't. It kind of plays out in life, right? For all of us that we think,
Mm.
oh, if only this happened, then that would be better. If I do this, then that would be better. But then it doesn't necessarily work that way. And because people don't always necessarily have that plan of how things will pan out. So it's an interesting kind of perspective that you've brought there. Uh, now, you kind of moved on from all of that. N- Are you working with people now to kind of shed those sorts of thoughts and limiting beliefs that they have, and what do you do today?
Yeah. So when I started working, I started in HR because that gave me the greatest number of possibilities. Because as an HR person, you can work in any industry, in any company. So that's what I was after. I wanted to have the freedom of choice. And then at some point, I lost my passion for it. It kind of lost I lost a sense of meaning and purpose in that career, and I always wanted to work with people closely, helping them with their
Mhm.
mindset and their limiting beliefs, and helping them really become the best possible version of themselves. That's what I've been really excited about. And so I discovered coaching and I became a coach. And so at first I worked as a career coach
Right.
because I wanted to help people escape, the toxic job that they was draining the life out of them, and find work they love. And then over time, I niche down to business founders because I could relate to that population even more, because now I'm a business founder, and
Mhm.
I know how hard it is to go through this entrepreneurial journey, and how all of the unresolved issues from before catch up with you, like all the traumas, all the self-doubt, all the destructive mental and emotional patterns and habits that you haven't resolved. You carry them all with you, and yeah, the business brings out the best in you and the worst in you, right?
Mm.
And so what I do today is I work with leaders and founders who are successful on paper, but they're n- they're not really enjoying their journey. They're not their success didn't actually bring them what they expected it would,
Mhm.
right? When we want to, just like you said a minute ago, you expect that once you achieve this, once this changes, everything's going to be better. You're finally going to be happy. So this is a trap into which all of us fall. As an entrepreneur, um, you think that once I achieve this level of income, then I'll finally be able to slow down, and that never happens, because that was never the problem. The problem was that you feel the pressure that you always need to perform and be the best, because otherwise you feel like a failure. And then, so
Mm.
those are the issues that you need to work with. And so, yeah, I would say that um, what is the price of success? I think that's the question that my work centers around. Um, how do you build a business that's both successful, but that also brings you fulfillment and that meets your other needs, so that you can build it from a place of joy and creativity, and so that you can experience fun and meaning and purpose and all of those other things that we need, so that you don't have to choose whether you're happy or successful. You can be both. But how can you be both
Mm,
when business by definition is hard? By definition, business is going to test you. It's going to bring out the worst in you. It's going to put a lot of pressure on you. How do you then go through those challenging and hard moments, um, so that you can succeed? Because if you avoid doing what's hard and challenging, then you're not going to grow. So how do you willfully go through all of that without suffering,
mm,
and still experiencing joy and fun and meaning and fulfillment? And then there's a whole plethora of adjacent problems, like how do you become a better leader for your people? How do you attract great performance into your company? So there are all of these things, right? That
mm,
how do you create a company in which you love where you love working, because it's your company, you created it. You don't need another, prison,
mm.
that you just escaped from when you left your corporate job, right? But
Yeah.
that's what a lot of business founders do. They recreate the same toxic relationship with work that they used to have back in their corporate life. They bring it all into their business, right?
Yes.
So that's, I would say, that's the best way to describe what I do.
That's great. And you touched on a few things there around success. So when you were growing up, you probably had a view of what success looks like for you then. You've now got this whole other view of what success looks like. So what does success mean to you? How has it changed on your journey?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. Back then, success meant the absence of failure. And absence of failure wasn't doing a good enough of a job, because for me, anything less than excellent was failure.
Right.
So I was, that when you have that, that means you're probably a perfectionist.
Hmm.
And I was, and I still am, but I'm not a slave to that perfectionist streak in me, because now I'm aware of it and I know, how to handle it. But for a very long time, I was a slave to my perfectionism, because I was addicted to achievement, because achievement was my main source of, self worth. And
Hmm.
so it comes back to the way that I grew up. Um, if I got top grades, I wouldn't necessarily get praise because that was expected. But if I got anything less than top grades in school, I would get criticized and scolded and shamed and all of that. And so
Hmm.
I learned to equate success is absence of failure. I was always more afraid to get less than perfect grades than
Right.
I was excited about getting good grades. For me, the goal was not to get anything less than 5. 5 is the top grade you can get in the creation system. And so I carried over that same pattern. I carried it into my, high school, into my university. I carried it over into my corporate job, and I carried it into my business.
Right.
And it took me a while to realize what I'm doing to myself, that I need to create a better, healthier, friendlier relationship with both failure and success. Because if I don't, then I'm always going to be playing not to lose instead of playing to win,
Yeah.
playing to create the life that I actually want to create. So I realized that I don't spend that much time feeling excited about all the great things I could create in my business, new ventures or projects, that I'm mostly concerned with not failing, right?
Mm.
And when I realized that, a lot of things have changed for me, because um, I realized that this attitude is what makes my experience and my entrepreneurial journey way harder than it has to be,
Yeah.
because there's so much fear and so much shame. Because when you have that setup, unless I do everything perfectly, unless I'm excellent all the time, that means I'm a failure. That automatically means I'm ashamed of myself. When you have that attitude, you're not going to experiment. You're not going to try new things. You're not going to reach out to people. You're not going to get good results.
Mm.
Um, and then you are going to fail. Um, so when I realized what a toxic relationship I have with success and failure and other things like rejection and all of the things that you experience as an entrepreneur, and that I actually need to work on my relationship with those
Hmm.
concepts because they are foundational, like they're inevitable parts of any business.
Mm.
And that's when things really, really changed for me.
It's interesting when you say this because I think many of us grow up right with that perspective of anything less than top marks is failure, right, in school, and
Mhm.
then that does carry forward. Um, and but if you're not ready to fail, then you're not necessarily growing, right? Because growth failure is part of growth, right? You learn the lessons. You might yes, at the time it might feel bad, but you learn from it. You do something different. You grow from that. But
Yeah.
we're often in this world where that's not acceptable. Failure is not an option, is often the expression, and yet it needs to be for us to grow and to learn from it.
Absolutely. And the way that I look at it now is it absence of results, absence of excellence is not failure. You just haven't mastered it yet. So if I'm trying something, like if you're fishing and you're throwing the rod in the water and you've been standing there for 5 minutes and you still haven't caught the fish, you wouldn't say I'm a failure or this
Yeah.
is a failed project, right? You still haven't caught the fish. You haven't caught it yet.
Mm.
So adding that yet helps me reframe that whole thing that, it's not failure. It's just you keep on trying until you succeed. Failure is only when you decide to give up and say, well, this was a failure, I'm going to move on. That's when you don't have any more that you don't have any chance to succeed anymore because you stopped trying. So,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
experimenting, trying things out, seeing what works, that feels like a more fun way to approach it now,
Yes.
rather than, either absolute smashing success or complete disastrous utter failure, right? Those are two extremes. Like there are so many things so many levels of success in between. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. And going back to something you said as well about entrepreneurs and success versus the joy of their business, the family life they have, or all those other elements. Yeah, part of the reason I set up Success Matters was because success is often measured by a metric. It's measured by the turnover of your business, your sales number, your KPIs at work. That's the metric. And if you don't achieve those, then you're a failure. And it's almost like black and white. So this conversation really helps to frame that, right? It's not just about that. Success is much broader than just that
Yeah.
KPI or
Yeah.
that number.
I think we all need to define what success means to us. And success always has like a quantitative element to it, but it also has a qualitative element to it. Because if you are hitting all of the targets and you're accomplishing all of the material goals and the numbers, but you feel bad in the process. You're completely burned out, exhausted, miserable. For me, there's good tired and there's bad tired. There's
Yeah.
good tired that comes from I've done a hard day's work. I feel good about myself. I provided value. I helped other people. I feel like I'm doing the work I'm meant to do. I'm using my greatest strengths and talents to make a difference that I really deeply care about. That's like good tired.
Mm.
Bad tired is like, I'm so exhausted. I can't talk to anyone. I hate myself. I hate the entire world. I want to burn this business down to the ground. Right. So if you're in that type of tired all the time, then is it really success?
Mm.
It sounds like it's only partial success. So um, it's a good reframe for me that ambition is you got to be more ambitious than that. If you really are as ambitious as you say you are, well, how about working on that
Mm.
fulfillment? Because that's what's ambitious. Like, how do you build success while also feeling good about it? Now, that's a challenging problem to solve. But
Mm.
always earning more and more and more and more, that doesn't sound ambitious. That just sounds like more of the same, right?
That's true. Yeah, there's it's that the qualitative part is the most important part, I think, rather than the quantitative part, because
Yeah.
quality of life is actually why you often start a business, right? Often why you do what you do is to have
Yeah.
a better
Yeah.
quality of life. And if that quality of life is not coming through because you're focusing on, as you say, hitting the number or increasing your earnings or constantly, then what was the point in doing that in the first
What's
place?
the
So,
point? Exactly.
mm,
And what's the point of all the sacrifices you had to make, of all the hard work, all the risk, all the anxiety and uncertainty and everything you had to endure? What's the point of paying such a really high price to get
mm.
so little out of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have a tradition in my podcast that I ask a previous guest to ask a question from my next guest. My previous guest asked the question, "What are you avoiding?"
What am I avoiding?
Hmm.
Ooh, I like that one. It's tricky. Um, so I guess I'm avoiding claiming anything. I'm the type of a person that always sees like a lot of complexities and things, and so I always avoid to say something. This is what it's like, right? And I know that's a good marketing strategy. To just say what you think. Just say this is how things are. I
Hmm.
It's difficult for me to say this is the number one reason why. I would rather say this is one of the reasons why. And so
Right.
I'm always like that in the way that I speak and the way that I think, um, because I value truth. And for me, truth is about precision.
Hmm.
And so to say that something is number one, like what's the data? Like what argument do you have for that? Like I don't. So I don't feel comfortable saying something that I can't really support with data. So I always kind of feel like I end up watering down what I'm saying just because I'm hesitant to claim this is what it's like. My promise is this. So I'm always, yeah, I think I'm avoiding committing to a certain idea so much just because there are a lot of people out there who are life coaches or all sorts of gurus who make those claims too easily. And I guess I don't want to sound like them. So in the attempt to not sound like them, in the attempt to not sound, overly like unrealistic in the promises that I make or, fake.
Yeah.
I go to great length to tell the truth, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's what I avoid committing to a certain position too firmly for that reason.
Yeah. And that probably goes back to what you said about perfectionism, because
Yeah,
unless you're
yeah,
100% certain about your position, you're going to water down what you're saying about that position.
yeah. Maybe that's something to think about.
Hmm. Interesting. It's good perspective actually, because many, as you were talking there, I was just kind of thinking about the British way of saying things often, right? Is not to be direct about something, but to kind of go around the houses. You might want to think about that. It might be
Yeah,
something we would
yeah,
say rather than you need to do this. Right?
yeah.
It's kind of it's a bit like that. That's the way we communicate in British English, and of course, it causes some challenges when you're talking to people who are more direct. So the British to American kind of
Mm.
approach. It's somewhat different. So yeah, that's great. Do you have a question for my next guest?
Yeah, I actually had a very like success related question, but now I changed my mind after
Okay.
getting this one. So the question is going to be what, let me phrase this well. What agreement do you have with yourself that you've been holding on to that you need to let go?
Okay. Yeah. What agreement do
Yeah,
you have with yourself that you've been holding on to that you need to let
yeah.
go? Okay.
Because I find that we often have those like secret agreements that we're not even aware of.
Uh-huh.
The agreement could be anytime somebody's late, I'm gonna get really angry. That
Mm.
doesn't sound like an agreement, but there is an if-then
Yeah.
rule there. So that makes it an agreement. And at some point you made that agreement with yourself. And if you made it, you can also break it. You don't have to stay loyal to it.
Right.
And yeah, so that's what I have in mind.
Okay.
And it's
Th-
been very useful for me to think about my own hidden agreements and
Yeah. Which was the
in my
most
work.
recent one you looked
Yeah.
at and thought, actually, why am I holding on to this agreement now?
The most recent one, Um, I think that hmm, there have been several because um, I guess I have really reshaped my relationship with rejection. So I think my agreement has been every time I experience some sort of rejection in life, I'm gonna take it very, very personally. I'm gonna take it as a sign I should never do this again.
Right.
Um, and I'm gonna get really angry with these people because how dare they? So I think that was in that was happening under the surface. And when I realized, wait a minute, I can just create a completely different relationship with rejection. I can make rejection mean something else.
Hmm.
um, I'm gonna make it mean, I don't really understand the value that you can bring me. So I turned it on me. Now it's my responsibility to do a better job of presenting whatever value I have. So this is a feedback for me that maybe it could be. Maybe this person isn't the right fit. Maybe it's not the right time. There could be many, many
Hmm.
explanations. There's one that is in my control, which is how can I articulate the value for this person for whatever I'm offering in a way that's more compelling to them? That's the part that I can control. And if there is any lesson to learn from this is how do I improve my communication? But I'm not going to make it mean something generalized and catastrophic about me and my business and my worthiness as a human being or whatever. And
Yeah.
so that agreement has been in place without me even realizing. It was just my default state of mind.
Hmm.
And then when I realized this is just one way to relate to rejection, I can create a completely new agreement there, a completely new rule. If rejection happens, then what? And
Yes.
I started doing it in advance before I even put myself in a position where I could be rejected, so that in advance, I knew what was the agreement I was going to um, refer to if the rejection happens, right? So that I'm
Mhm.
not automatically reacting, but that I can actually remember, oh, I promised to myself that if this happens, this is how I'm going to respond. So that made a huge difference.
Mm. Yeah, that's
It
really,
opened so
really
many
cool.
new doors, so many new possibilities. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think that question has a lot of power. I would invite anybody listening to this conversation to ask themselves that.
Yeah, it does definitely have a lot
Yeah.
of power. So we're at the top of our time now, Anita. It's been a great
Oh my
conversation.
god,
Thank
it
you very
just
much.
flew by.
It does indeed. The time flies very quickly. If people want to get in touch with you or find out more, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Anita, Cavrag. I'm also on Facebook under the same name. My website is fireflycareer.com. So you can find me there. You can reach out at any time, send a message. I'll be happy to chat and learn more about you and see if there's any way I can help. I also have a little free gift for anybody who's listening and who's experiencing like a lack of fulfillment or excitement in their business. So, just a bit of a context, what happens for a lot of people is only when they experience a very traumatic or like ground shaking event in their life do they start thinking about where am I now? Where am I going? And all of that. And so, there is a really great exercise that I prepared, which kind of induces that state of mind, not the traumatized state of mind, but the state of mind where you are able to look at your life from an elevated position that really helps you face where you are and whether the life you're living is actually going to lead um, to that sense of pride and fulfillment when you look back on what you've done or regret.
Mhm.
Right. So it's very short. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes to go through it. And so I'm going to send you the link, Sanjay, so that the audience can find it in the wherever you share this conversation.
Okay.
They can
Yeah,
click on it,
absolutely.
download it, do it. Yeah.
Send the link through and I'll put it into the show notes so people can access it through there.
Yeah, wonderful.
So that's great. Well, Anita, thank you very much for sharing your story and thank you for taking part in Success Matters. It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure lots of people will take some insights from this, and especially asking themselves about that agreement that they've made with themselves that no longer serves them.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having me. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
To find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.